They were torturing me. I believe now that Stacy Stubblefield was deliberately torturing my son and pushing it on his skull. I believe, I don't remember which state she came from. I think that she did a little bit of an internship or did some kind of midwifery in Seattle. And in Seattle, I think she went to the University of Washington. University of Washington is the same hospital that in 1974 was conducting experimental trials on quote-unquote head molding. And they were basically doing, another word for it is cranial manipulation. They were basically experimenting on newborns' heads before they were born by trying to press in on spots and push and manipulate, basically traumatize the skull and reshape it before the child was out of the womb. And they were doing this kind of research and, papers, there were lectures on it. And I found documentation about it. All the way in 1974, and then after that point as well, and that was hosted as if, that was just what they did in the public view. That wasn't even a top secret project. That was something that they shared with everybody and published papers on it. So they were doing that kind of thing, and that's where she got her training. And I didn't even think that she would be doing something like that. It's not like I came up with the idea that she must have been doing a cranial manipulation or had some weird idea. It was that I later did some research as to where she got her schooling, because what she had done was so bizarre that then when I randomly came across that information, I thought, you know what, that's almost exactly, it just really matches what kinds of things she was doing. And then finally, the other thing that happened is either the anesthesiologist didn't know what he was doing, he said he was sort of new, or they deliberately didn't want me to have any anesthesia and they wanted me to suffer, because he didn't put the epidural in correctly. And I didn't feel any of the effects of the epidural at all. All I was getting was topical shots. And after that, it looked like it was dripping, but I don't know where it was going because I didn't feel any effects. It was almost like I was hooked up to salt water or some sort of saline solution or something else, because I did not feel the effects of any kind of anesthesia whatsoever for an epidural. It didn't block anything. The only thing that I had any relief from was a couple shots of a different kind of pain killer. And then my epidural was running out. The IV was running out of fluid, and I was hysterical because the pain was so extreme, and what they were doing to me was so extreme. So I demanded, I said, this is going out, and they were just going to leave it. Stacy Stubblefield wasn't going to have the anesthesiologist come back to keep my epidural going. So she got this other anesthesiologist comes in. She says, how long has this been out? Because they let it run all the way out. And then this other woman came in and she hooked it up again, but I still didn't feel any relief. All I did is I just noticed that she hooked it up again, and she asked questions of them as to why they had let it run out. Stacy Stubblefield not only let my epidural run out and was refusing to get an anesthesiologist, she also refused to get an OBGYN until she had the one that she wanted in the hospital. So then that woman it was really horrific. Finally, after many hours and hours of this happening, and then my son's heart rate and everything dropping, all of his vital signs going down, pretty much into a state of he was about to die. And this is while she had her hands inside of me and was doing horrible things. He was suffering, and I was suffering, and then she got an instrument of some kind, and it was a plunger. I mean, it was something like with a suction cup on the head, and then like some long handle on the other side that she held on to. It was an instrument which, if there's any labor, or if you have a delivery that incorporates any kind of instrument, whether it's forceps or one of those suction things, regardless of what kind of instrument it is, I've talked to tons of OBGYNs since this time, and they all said that that means it's not a spontaneous, natural vaginal delivery. It's an assisted delivery. It's not spontaneous. However, so then she was using that, and then I pushed again when she wasn't pushing against my son's head. And my son came out, I heard my pelvis break at the same time. My tailbone and my pelvis was fractured, and my tailbone broke. A lot of people say that a broken tailbone is not unusual in a pregnancy. However, a fractured pelvis, to have your entire pelvis fractured, is unusual. The other thing that happened is I prolapsed on almost every part of my body there, and to the point where I couldn't urinate on my own. I was that damaged. My son was a strapping 8 pounds 11 ounces. He was obviously and clearly very healthy and well nourished. And yet he had this horrible injury on his skull, in one spot specifically. It wasn't like his entire head was injured. It was like somebody had pushed in on a specific spot on his skull. It was perfectly round, like someone had pushed in a thumb into his skull for a very long time. It wasn't jagged. Like, it wasn't like a jagged cut or bruise or anything like that, which you would think might happen if he was stuck up against my pelvis in some way or was trying to get out and couldn't. It was basically I think it was on the left side of his head, and then it was like so far. I'll show you, like so far back. It was like, if this is the center, then it was maybe this far from the center, and just past the forebrain, the forehead area. And it was perfectly round. It was this perfectly round, very bright red mark. Bruise and bleeding that scabbed over. And then after this was done to him, they said he might need bilirubin lights, but then it was like they didn't want him to be under him because it would be like acknowledging something that had happened. And then she had this Japanese-American OBGYN come into the room again, who had refused to do the C-section. And she came in and had to stitch me up because I had the worst tears that you can have. I had 4th degree, I think it's called 4th degree tears. And it's basically the very worst classification. It's the most extreme kind of tearing that you can have. And I was hemorrhaging, and they had to keep giving me shots, and I was still bleeding, and then she stitched me up, and it was basically a nightmare that never had to have happened. So then it got worse, because I saw my medical records after this happened, and the classification of the tears was 4th degree, or whatever the worst was, the worst kind of tearing is. That's what it was written down as. Then I couldn't urinate at all. I was hooked up to a catheter. My son had this horrible head injury, And and then I had a nurse come up to me and tell me privately. I didn't say anything to her really at first, but she came up to me and told me, you need to get a lawyer. She said, what happened in there was not okay, it was not normal, and you need to get a lawyer right away. And she said this like in a whispering tone. I then asked to look at the records at the nurse's station maybe a day or two later, a couple days later, after I was seriously considering getting a lawyer, and I think they already knew this. Because what I said to her, the last thing that I said to Stacy before she left the operating room is I said, I'm getting a lawyer. I said something about suing her. Or I said something about how I didn't want her to see me. Maybe I didn't say I'm going to sue you. And I actually don't think I did at that point. And I don't believe I said, I basically told her I wanted her to leave. And I didn't want to see her again. And it was right after my son was delivered, I said, I want you to leave. And I said, I don't want you to come back here again. So when I told her to leave, and I said I would only speak to a different doctor, and I didn't want her in the room or around me because she had refused to get assistance as she was required to by law, and because she had harassed me and then tortured both me and my son, I made sure that she wasn't coming back into that room for anything or to do any kind of follow-up. And all of a sudden, Dr. Butler, he's the one who came in after my son was born, and he and Stacy sort of flirted with each other. I mean, they flirted with each other in a way that made me think they were almost having an affair. It wasn't just sort of light-hearted flirting. It was more like, I seriously thought from the way they acted with each other, they've been intimate with each other. They're both about the same age. You know, she's fairly attractive, so is he, and she has enormous boobs. I mean, I don't know. I definitely had the impression that they had something going on. And then he left and left the room, and I said I didn't want her to come back into the room again, or to be around me again, around my son. So I basically dismissed her permanently. And after that, I found out that the chart notes, I think she was worried that she was going to get sued because she knew it. There's no way she didn't know what she had done was wrong. So I found out that the classification of the tearing was being dropped down to a not so bad of a classification. So they were minimizing what kinds of damages I had with that. And the other thing, that was the main thing that I found out happened while I was there. And then I also found out, well, I did also find out that she called it was being categorized as a quote-unquote normal spontaneous vaginal delivery. It wasn't normal, it wasn't spontaneous, she used an instrument, and it was not, there was nothing normal or spontaneous about it at all. Then I found out that she was calling me, all of a sudden she was trying to defame me to other nurses there and medical personnel as an alcoholic and a drug user. So the two things that I heard was social of a sudden I was being called, a nurse came over to me and she said, Stacy wants you to see wants a social worker to see you because she says you're an alcoholic. And she said, is that true? Are you an alcoholic? And I said no. I had actually gone out. The last time that I had gone out for a drink in the town was the time that I was raped by the doctor, who was Italian American,